To hear the entire show and many others, visit www.PureMomentumNetwork.net.
Once again, they're depicting the same celestial players and are now appearing in a different stage. And we've got 12 disciples, and the leader, of the 12 disciples is Peter. And Peter is also associated with Aries. He's headstrong like a ram. And there's a lot of symbology and imagery in the Gospels that depict Peter next to a fire, which is the equinox. Next to, he's there at the, he's told to feed my sheep in the, when he's reinstated by Christ, he's told, feed my sheep. It's a reference, or that's a clue that we can use to try and figure out, well, who is Peter? Oh, Peter is probably Aries, and he relates to Moses in that way. So, so the whole system is built around that sort of connection. And I explain that as thoroughly and as systematically as I can in the first section of The Undying Stars.
Well, that's great. And people need this. It will, the more that we, as human beings, the more we meet and introduce ourselves to our family members, the stronger we are as an individual. And as we go through and connect our place in nature with other people's and other beings' place in nature, it makes us stronger. And that's why the Native Americans and other indigenous people were so very strong, was because they knew their place in the natural order, but they also knew my place and the four-legged's place and the winged one's place and the standing ones and the plant life. They knew everybody's place. And that makes us stronger because we're not out here alone. We are part of a natural system. And when you start talking about this ancient system in part one, it should strengthen everyone that reads it to say, man, this is really great because I'm connected to this. This is part of me.
Absolutely. No, those are really, really important points. We're connected to, we're connected to nature. We're connected to the universe. And, as I wrote the book, I put a little warning at the very beginning. If you,
I read it
on the other side of the title, because I don't want to, people may have a very strong, look, if you take this literally and this gives you meaning to your life and you don't wish to see ways that it, may not be actually intended to be taken literally, I'm not trying to force anyone to see it this way, but if you're hungry for this information, then please, by all means, read on. And also, I said, look, if you're at a place where you're strong enough to say, look, if the evidence is good, I want to follow the evidence, and if the evidence is not so good, then there should be no worry to read it, because if what I'm saying doesn't make any sense, or if what I'm saying doesn't have the evidence behind it, then you can just safely read it and say, yeah, I've read that and I can show you why it's wrong. Right. And by the way, as you've already alluded to, I'm not the first person to point out these connections. There's a whole word called astrotheology that was around before I was born. In fact, it was around, there was a preacher in England who wrote a book called Astronomico Theological Lectures, the Astronomico Theological Lectures. He was actually preaching on this subject in the 1830s. And by the way, if you go all the way back to the ancient times, there are plenty of ancients who wrote about, there are ancient writers, Lucian of Samosata, who said, oh, this story of Ares and Aphrodite being caught in a net when they're having an illicit affair, and then, all the gods come and find them caught in bed by this net that descended on them. Lucian wrote that this must relate to a conjunction of the planets Mars and Venus in the Pleiades. And he actually said that, in ancient times we had writers who were explaining this. In fact, Aristotle even, there's a book called Hamlet's Mill, which was published in 1969, and it's been very, influential. Lots of people have found a lot of, wonderful information in there, including myself. A lot of what I do is based on that. So, so the point I was reaching towards is that this is not unique to me. I'm trying to lay it out as systematically as possible, because I'll tell you that Hamlet's Mill is not systematic at all. It's a kind of goes in circles and circles and circles, and it's one of those things that you want to read probably 8 or 9 times. It's a wonderful book, but it may leave you a little frustrated the first time you read it. You say, well, why don't they just come out and say it?
Right.
So I try to explain it a little more clearly, both in the blog posts that I write and in The Undying Stars. But
I read that warning in the beginning of your book, and what I thought in my mind was, this sounds like my husband. He is so gingerly walking. He doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Okay, I appreciate that. I am the opposite. I think it's time for people to grow up and look at things the way they're supposed to be, because the way they are now is just dividing us. And if we see that we all sacred scriptures, all sacred writings, and even oral traditions are based on the astral world, we need to know this stuff. And so I appreciate your way of coming at it. I'm very familiar with it, because my husband is the same way. He does not want to offend anyone. I want to shake him and say, it's time. It's time. We've got to figure out what's going on here. And the way we can do that is by looking at another layer of this, because the dark side has their layers and the light side has our layers. And so everything is layered, and you can go as deep as you want into the information. So I do appreciate your personality and how you went about this book. And there is no way that anyone, I don't care how religious they are, could be offended by this book. There's just no way. Well, it's too gentle for that.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Pamela. But I would say that, when it comes to, violence, I don't think changes anyone's, and I'm not saying that you're advocating violence, but let me just say, I don't think even by mentally shaking someone, I know you just meant that as a metaphor, but I think a better way might be to say, or not, let me not say a better way. I think we can reconcile your zeal and your husband's gingerliness by saying, look, hey, I do point out in the book, you were mentioning, look at how strong this connection to the universe makes the Native American peoples. Look at what a solid pillar they have to support them in their knowledge that we're all connected, in their sacred traditions that have been passed down and that are, that support and sustain them and give them this vision of the world. And then look at how that was destroyed, or at least attacked. Look at how it was, and that, that is a tremendous violation of natural law. It's a tremendous violation of natural universal law. And it wasn't just, I don't believe it was just, we had a more technologically advanced civilization that had guns and ships that could cross the ocean. And when it encountered a civilization that had bows and arrows, it was just naturally going to be, violence. No. Well, there is, let's face it, there is natural violence that happens between people, from the exact same culture, from the exact same neighborhood, right? But so, yes, there is that, but there was a targeting. There was a deliberate eradication. Yes. When the first conquistadors came over, they gathered up the sacred texts of the Maya. The Maya and the Inca brought them the text and said, look, we're going to share some ancient knowledge with you. Right. And then they were horrified as the conquistadors made a giant bonfire, piled it up in a pyramid and lit it on fire deliberately.
Right.
And then you have in the North America, you had children being taken to school mandatory at the age of 6. Parents, you no longer are allowed to raise your children. We're going to mandatorily make them speak our language, learn our religion.
Yeah, I know.
There was all this, but the reason I'm bringing it up, and this is more of part 3, but is to say, even someone who finds tremendous solace from taking the scriptures literally, and that's their entire identity, has to look at that and say, okay, you're right. There was tremendous, there's tremendous wrong things that were done in the past. And what you're saying, and the reason why you're so zealous and you're so, I want to, we need to present, is because it's still going on.
To hear the entire show and many others, visit www.PureMomentum.net.